Transitional moments have always been the most interesting to me in the gaming hobby. And I think right now we're in the midst of a very unique transition. The next generation of consoles, PlayStation 5 and Xbox One X, have released and they're slowly becoming more available. And even as people make the transition to those new platforms, there are a number of unique, niche, interesting releases coming out for the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch, the majority of which are exclusive to those platforms. There's not, in a lot of cases, a PlayStation 5 version of some of the games that I'm going to talk about in this video. One could surmise that companies have a lower cost of entry into producing and developing games for these systems, and perhaps the lower price points, the lower investment means that they can take a chance on releasing or localizing some games that would have been either not made or that would have remained exclusive to Japan 5 or 6 years ago. So as somebody who is into those more unique, off-the-beaten-path kind of experiences, and as someone who is very much into collecting and looking for rarity and value down the road, I found myself being very caught up in the releases of late. But it brings with it an interesting question. Which console is best to collect for with these titles that I'm going to talk about? Is it the PlayStation 4? Is it the Nintendo Switch? We're going to look at a handful of games and see if we can come to a determination about which versions of these games should you get. So I think there's a couple different levels in answering this question. I think the first is if you're going to buy these games to play them. And that's kind of where I see myself, even if in the end I can't find the time. My intent is to always play them. Which systems should you buy them for? And here I think the PlayStation 4 is the system of choice. So I'll give you an example. I wanted to play Trials of Mana. I know that it came out on the PlayStation 4 and the Switch, and I just assumed that I would pick up the PlayStation 4 version because it was just going to be more powerful. It would be more fluid. It would be the ideal experience. I know the game's also out on Steam, but for whatever reason, Secret of Mana, I played in front of the television. I wanted to do the same thing. So I think that is consideration number one. That having been said, the types of games that are coming out that I'm talking about, and let's take Disaster Report 4. Disaster Report has a history in Japan, but I think only 2 were localized on the PlayStation 2, and if you've played them, they are very kind of clunky. So the current Disaster Report, I take it's still not a technical marvel, but, are there any Digital Foundry-style deep dives into which console really performs better? All that I've come across have been just reviews for one platform or another, and they don't really sing the praises of either version. So I think in the absence of that kind of hard technical analysis, you're going to be left to your own criteria on which version to choose. Now, I think there's an emotional answer to that question, and I think there's a kind of investor's mindset that you could bring to that question. And both are not terribly effective in helping you make a decision. The emotional component, the nostalgic component, for me, I kind of think, well, when did I first discover the game? What system did I play the game on first? So take, for example, Umehara Kawase. This is, I think, one of the most overlooked strategy platformers. It's a very, very fun game. I played it initially on the Super Famicom. It's one of the games that I imported early on, and it's always been associated with Nintendo for me. So if I can't find any glaring distinctions between the two, I'm going to play it on a Nintendo console. The same goes for The World Ends With You Neo. Again, it's available on both systems. I picked it up on the Switch because it was a DS game. and I just associated that experience with Nintendo, and I've wanted to continue that experience on a Nintendo console, and it's performed fine. I haven't really noticed any major issues. But now you look at it from the standpoint of somebody who wants to collect, who wants something that will be valuable down the road. And again, you can kind of do a little debate. Point one for the PlayStation 4 would be, I think, the point of rarity, perhaps. Rarity in that the PlayStation 4 has been replaced. It is no longer, perhaps in the minds of consumers, a viable console, even though I believe all PlayStation 4 games are compatible with the PlayStation 5. But it's slowly fading away. So perhaps the PlayStation 4 versions of these games will be rarer. But you could turn that around and say, well, there's more PlayStation consoles out there. There's about 115 million to about 77, 78 million Switch consoles. So maybe because there are more players, more are going to be released on the PlayStation 4 than the Switch. I don't know that. You don't have population numbers unless you're buying a limited run games kind of release, in which case I believe you do know. But that is a minority situation. Then I think what you have going for the Switch is that you have this idea of collectability. I get the sense that the Switch is already a beloved console, even though I have a lot of problems with it. I've talked about that on this channel many times. But generally, I think people are enjoying it. I think the whole influencer marketing push about, oh, it's portable, you can play it anywhere. I think it led a lot of people who kind of grew up with Nintendo nostalgia to kind of come back to the console. And people really do, I think, seem to appreciate it, particularly in the retro gamer community. So perhaps the Switch releases, even if they're not rare as far as numbers of copies go, perhaps they will be the more desirable collector's item. People going for a complete Nintendo Switch collection. But you could also make the case that in the absence of any objective information as to why one should prefer the PlayStation 4 versus the Switch, that it'll kind of be a game-by-game decision. Gamers and collectors will take their own individual criteria to the decision-making process in selecting one game or one platform over the other, in which case you kind of have to probably follow forums and social media to see what people are thinking. And then you layer in, finally, the fact that this might be the last barrage of physical media. Physical media is waning. Netflix is getting into gaming. Gaming is moving towards becoming a streaming service or at least a subscription service. So maybe it doesn't matter which version you pick. Maybe these games will just be rare and collectible because at the end of the day, this might be the last generation with a lot of physical releases. So when you put all that together, the question doesn't become easier to answer. You could take it in all of these directions, and all seem to be valid. Again, at least from my perspective, maybe I'm missing some source of technical information which would lead you to really prefer one version over the other. I'm not as actively following gaming news and YouTube as I once was, so please point me in the direction of some of that information. Maybe it is just, in the end, personal preference, in which case let me know which system you prefer and why. So it's an interesting discussion, and let's get it started down below.